enough away to be, if I was going to my dad's house, it would be away from my friends, so I never really used to see him. You don't realise till now that actually like beat him up a bit. Like,
sometimes what you don't see tells a bigger story than what you do. Despite years in front of millions of viewers, Matt Armstrong has kept one family member almost entirely out of frame: his sister. While Matt rips million-pound machines apart for an audience of millions, she remains hidden somewhere the lens is simply not permitted to follow. And the reason she disappeared so completely turned out to be far darker and stranger than anything the fans ever let themselves believe. The car that almost ended him. In the closing weeks of the year 2025, Matt Armstrong walked into the single most dangerous gamble of his entire career, and for a while, it looked like it was going to swallow him whole. He had gotten his hands on a wrecked Ferrari 296 GTB that had been destroyed out in Cyprus, a car that came apart because the driver made the reckless decision to switch off the traction control before losing everything on the asphalt. The fender was gone, the headlights were shattered, the engine refused to wake up, and no matter what he tried, the car simply would not start. He had already burned through around 9,000 pounds just getting the thing to roll onto a trailer so it could be shipped back to the United Kingdom. And that was before the real nightmare had even begun. Matt built his entire name on one promise: that he could resurrect any wreck without ever crawling back to the manufacturer for help. Ferrari is the one brand that guards its secrets like treasure, handing its technical playbook only to licensed garages and treating every unofficial repair as if it were a personal insult. So when that 296 GTB sat lifeless on his ramp week after week, refusing to breathe, it stopped being a car and quietly became a verdict on everything he claimed to be. You could feel the mood shift in the comments. The same crowd that once cheered him started sharpening their knives, questioning whether he had finally bitten off more than his talent could ever chew. He replaced the twin turbo and the intercooler. He salvaged the airbags by rolling the canisters back in to save money, and he even bolted on body panels lifted straight from the Ferrari 296 Challenge, before finishing it with a huge rear wing and a monster diffuser. It looked completely reborn, and yet it still refused to start. Then, Matt did the one thing his whole brand was built to avoid. Under a mountain of public pressure, with his reputation hanging by a single thread, he swallowed his pride and sent the car to Ferrari themselves. They found the fault he never could, and the machine roared back to life almost the instant it reached them. The relief was real, but that pressure was never something he had been carrying on his own. And there was one person he made absolutely certain would never have to feel a single ounce of it: the billionaire who wanted him gone. The reason Matt guards the people he loves this fiercely starts to make sense once you see the kind of enemies his success began pulling toward him. And one of them sat right at the very summit of the supercar world. It began when an American influencer named Alex Gonzalez, known to his followers as FXG, obliterated his Bugatti Chiron Pure Sport in a crash so brutal that the repair bill through official channels would have been life-changing. Instead of handing it back to Bugatti, Alex bought the wreckage back through Copart, the salvage auction site, and made a choice that lit a fuse nobody saw coming. He sent a $6 million hypercar straight to a YouTuber's workshop. The man who runs Bugatti Rimac, a brilliant and famously blunt engineer named Mate Rimac, did not take that quietly. He went on to Instagram and made his feelings impossible to misread, arguing that the structural integrity of a car like that was hanging by a thread, and that letting anyone outside his network of licensed engineers lay hands on it was a danger nobody should ever accept. He claimed there were only two places on the entire planet capable of splitting a Chiron cleanly into its front and rear halves, a job that sits right at the outer edge of what is even mechanically possible. For most creators, a public warning from a hypercar chief executive would have been the end of the conversation. For Matt, it landed like an invitation. He has always had this streak buried in him, a quiet hunger to be underestimated, and being doubted by a billionaire only poured fuel on it. He filmed himself and the lads doing the exact thing he had been told could not be done. And he made no secret of his goal to turn his own garage into the third place on Earth where a Chiron could be pulled apart and put back together. He split the car clean in two. He swapped the ruined airbag for a $15,000 unit pulled from an Audi, and he insisted that half the parts on the thing could simply be printed, all while pushing back against every purist, screaming that he was hopelessly out of his depth. And yet, for all that nerve, the car fought him the same way the Ferrari would later, refusing to start no matter what he threw at it. Every single one of these wars played out in front of millions of watching eyes, and through all of it the same familiar faces stood at his shoulder, all except the one Armstrong, who was never once allowed into the frame. The father who walked back into the light. The faces beside him were never just employees, and that is exactly what makes the missing one hurt so much more. There was Bob, there was Dips, there was Liam, the crew who somehow turned the clang of wrenches and the misery of a stubborn rebuild into something that felt like a family kitchen at dinner time. But the one who truly stole the whole audience was never meant to be a star at all, and that was Matt's father, Tony Armstrong. Their story did not begin as a warm one, and Matt has never once pretended otherwise. He grew up in Leicester in a home that broke apart when his parents separated, and he spent most of those years living with his mother and his sister, while his relationship with Tony withered down to almost nothing. He has openly admitted that he was not a good son back then, that he skipped visits to his own father because seeing him meant sacrificing precious time with his mates. That is not the confession of a man performing for a camera. That is someone telling on his younger self, because the guilt of it clearly still lingers. What eventually pulled them back together was the very thing that had once driven them apart. Because Tony was a mechanic long before Matt ever picked up a spanner. It started with small phone calls, a question about money here, a question about which engine to buy there, and slowly a bridge that had been rotting for years began to hold real weight again. By the time the channel exploded, Tony was not some guest appearing on it. He was the beating heart of it, the lead mechanic who solved the problems that left his son stumped, the man the fans genuinely adored. You saw it most clearly with the Ferrari F430, when Matt, in a rare admission of his own limits, simply handed the entire project to his dad as a gift and let him crack the faults that had beaten everyone else. Tony worked out how to open the doors without dropping the windows first, sorted the handbrake, corrected the ride height, and did every bit of it with the calm of a man who had been fixing broken things his whole life. It was a beautiful thing to watch. A father stepping fully into the warmth of the lights beside his son. And as Tony walked back into that light, the daughter who had lived through the exact same broken home quietly slipped somewhere the cameras were never able to reach. The name nobody was allowed to say. Her name is Holly, and if that is the very first time you are hearing it, then you have just proven the entire point of this video for me. Across more than a decade of content, across thousands of hours of Matt opening up his home, his relationship, his father, and his failures to the public, Holly Armstrong exists as little more than a whisper. She has never sat inside the workshop. She has never been introduced to the audience. And for long stretches, most fans had no earthly idea that Matt even had a sister in the first place. That absence, once people finally clocked it, started to feel deliberate in a way that made the skin prickle. Think about it from where the audience was actually sitting. This is a man who let the whole world watch him rebuild the fractured relationship with his father in real time, who turned his girlfriend Hannah into a recurring character the fans grew genuinely fond of, who put his entire life on a plate and served it up week after week. He held absolutely nothing back from those viewers, nothing at all, except for this one single thing, except for her. So the questions started, quietly at first, and then everywhere, all at once. People wanted to know why the one person he grew up beside, the sister who shared that same fractured childhood with him, was the only member of the family kept permanently out of view. Some assumed he was shielding her, protecting a private woman from the machine of fame that he understood better than almost anyone alive. Others were nowhere near as gentle in their guessing. What made it worse was the timing, because Holly did not simply decide one day to go quiet. Her absence only ever became a talking point once Matt grew famous enough that people started counting who was in the room and who was not. Before the cameras, before the supercars, before the wars with billionaires, nobody was keeping score at all. But fame does something genuinely ugly to silence. It takes a private choice and twists it into a puzzle, and it convinces total strangers that they are somehow owed the answer. The silence around Holly grew so heavy and so unexplained that the internet did what the internet always does when it is handed a gap. It decided to fill that empty space with a story of its own. The story the internet decided to tell. The theory that took hold was as tidy as it was cruel, and it spread like a fire through dry grass. It went something like this. Holly, the story claimed, had never forgiven their father for what he did to the family when they were still children. Tony was the one who left, the reason they grew up in a broken home, the reason there was no father in the house during the exact years a young Matt needed one most. And so when Matt welcomed Tony back with open arms and handed him a starring role in his success, the theory insisted that Holly saw the whole thing as a betrayal far too deep to ever sit beside. You can see why it caught on so fast. It had everything a really good piece of gossip needs. It had a villain, it had a wound, and it had two siblings supposedly torn straight down the middle by a choice one of them made in front of the entire world. Fans began to whisper that Matt had picked his father over his sister, that his hunger to reconnect with Tony had quietly cost him Holly, and that every warm father and son moment on the channel was secretly breaking her heart somewhere off-screen. The internet only leaned in harder from there. During that same Ferrari F430 rebuild, when Hannah appeared and shared an easy, affectionate, almost fatherly closeness with Tony, people pointed straight at it as proof. If the girlfriend could stand inside that warm little circle, they argued, then the absence of the actual daughter simply had to mean something. The speculation stopped feeling like speculation at all. It started getting repeated as though it were established fact, passed from comment to comment and video to video, until it hardened into something the whole audience just assumed was true. Matt never confirmed a single word of it, not once, not across an entire decade of being asked. He watched this story about his own family metastasize across the platform, this narrative that painted him as a brother who abandoned his sister, and he flatly refused to feed it. A man that's skilled at playing the public game could have killed the rumor in a single afternoon if he wanted to. He chose silence instead. And that choice, the longer you turn it over in your hands, points to something far quieter and far more human than any feud the internet was so desperate to sell you. What the cameras quietly take away. Look at what this kind of life actually does to the people standing near it. Not the star in the middle of the glare, but the ones caught just outside its edge. Matt chose all of this. He chose the cameras, the scrutiny, the billionaires firing shots at him on Instagram, the entire army of strangers dissecting every panel he ever welded into place. When Bugatti came for him, every post he made was dragged under a microscope and picked apart by people who had never once met him. He signed up for that willingly, and he even seems to feed on it. But nobody ever thinks to ask the person who did not sign up for any of it whether they wanted their face bolted onto that circus. The creator makes a single choice, and everybody connected to them by blood or by love gets pulled into the current, whether they agreed to it or not. Tony wanted in, and he thrived. Hannah found her own place inside it, but a sister who simply wanted to live a normal life. to keep her job and her friends and her privacy fully intact, would have every reason on earth to want no part of the noise that follows her brother absolutely everywhere he goes. If you have ever had a sibling do something that dragged a spotlight anywhere near your own quiet life, then you already know exactly how that feels. You know the strange helplessness of being defined by someone else's decisions, of being asked about a world you never once chose to step into. Now stretch that feeling across millions of viewers and a solid decade of relentless attention, and staying invisible stops looking like some dark mystery and starts looking like the single sanest thing a person could possibly do. Maybe that is the real weight Matt has been carrying this whole time, the one he never once complained about out loud. Maybe protecting Holly from all of it was never some scandal he was hiding, but a promise he was quietly keeping. He took the blame, he let the rumors swirl, and he allowed complete strangers to call him a bad brother without correcting a single soul, because correcting them would have meant dropping her name into the middle of the very storm he was trying so hard to keep her out of. Strip away every theory the internet ever wrote, and one plain, unglamorous truth is left standing in the wreckage of all that noise. The truth that was never a scandal.
And gave him a call and he says, "Oh, I'll come up and help." And then from then, it just, I don't know what happened. The wheels started turning and...
Here it is, the answer the title promised you, and it is going to feel almost anticlimactic after everything the rumor mill piled on top of it. There is no verified feud. There is no confirmed estrangement. There is no dramatic falling out between Holly and her brother. And there is not a shred of proof anywhere that she has cut ties with a single member of that family. Every last piece of that gripping betrayal story was constructed by fans filling a silence with the most exciting explanation they could dream up, and then repeating it until it wore the convincing costume of fact. What we are honestly left with is so much simpler than all of that. Holly Armstrong is a private person who never once asked to be famous, and her brother, for all his willingness to bear his own life to the world, has quietly respected that line for well over a decade. That is the whole of it, and that is the real reason. She was never hidden because of some poisonous family secret. She was hidden because somebody who loved her decided that her ordinary, peaceful, off-camera life was worth more than a few extra minutes of content. And he defended that choice, even when defending it made him look guilty as sin. The tattoos, the wrecked supercars, the endless wars with the manufacturers, all of that is the loud and obvious part of who Matt Armstrong is. But his truest work was maybe never on a ramp at all. Maybe it was standing in front of a camera for years, absorbing every ugly accusation thrown at him, and never once trading his sister's peace for a better story. That is not a man who lost Holly. That is a man who guarded her, right there in front of all of us. And we called it a mystery. So tell me honestly, do you believe Matt did the right thing by shielding Holly from every bit of this? Or do you think the fame made her disappearance impossible to avoid in the end? Drop your thoughts down in the comments.